By 0447 local time, the duty officer at the Hardened aircraft shelter had just finished his log entry. Routine. The Su-34 on Bay 3 had come back from its morning sortie 5 hours earlier, dropped its pair of Fab 1500 glide bombs somewhere over Zaporizhia Oblast, and taxied in without incident. The ground crew had finished the post-flight inspection by midnight. The aircraft was cold, fueled, and rearmed. It was sitting exactly where it always sat, tucked inside a reinforced concrete shelter, the kind built in the Soviet era to survive a NATO air campaign. The duty officer had seen 100 nights like this one. He did not see the targeting packet that had been building on that shelter for 4 months. This is the story of how Ukraine changed the rules of the glide bomb war, not by shooting the bombs down, not by pushing the Su-34s further from the front, but by finding where those aircraft sleep and striking them there. Stay until the end, because the targeting method Ukraine used and what it means for Russia's entire glide bomb sortie rate going forward is the part that has Russian aviation commanders genuinely alarmed. That detail lands in the final third. Let's build to it. First, the weapon that made all of this necessary. The Fab 1500 is a Soviet-era iron bomb fitted with a UMPEG glide kit, folding wings, a GPS and inertial guidance module bolted to the tail. The bomb weighs roughly 1,500 kilograms. Its warhead is around 675 kilograms of high explosive. When it detonates inside a reinforced Ukrainian defensive position, it does not just destroy the position, it collapses the earth around it. Ukrainian infantry units defending the Zaporizhia and Kherson axes reported in early 2026 that a single Fab 1500 strike could render a fortified trench line untenable across a 50-meter radius, not from fragmentation, but from overpressure and ground shock. These were not precision weapons in the traditional sense. They were area denial delivered with just enough guidance to hit a grid square. The delivery platform for both the Fab 500 and Fab 1500 variants was, overwhelmingly, the Sukhoi Su-34. Russia operated roughly 120 of these aircraft in its tactical aviation fleet as of late 2025, according to open-source aviation tracking and Ukrainian military intelligence statements. The Su-34 is a twin-engine, twin-seat strike aircraft with a combat radius of approximately 1,100 kilometers unrefueled. Its real advantage in the glide bomb campaign was not speed or stealth, it was standoff range. The UMP glide kit gave a Fab 1500 a release-to-impact range of up to 70 kilometers depending on release altitude. That meant an Su-34 never had to enter the engagement envelope of Ukrainian medium-range air defense. It could release from Russian-controlled airspace, and the bomb would fly the rest of the way on its own. Ukraine's air defense could not reliably intercept the bombs in flight. The UMP glide bombs flew a depressed, fast trajectory and tracking dozens of them simultaneously, while also managing drone and missile threats exceeded the capacity of available interceptor stocks. Every Ukrainian military briefing through 2025 came back to the same problem. The bombs were the symptom, the Su-34s were the disease, and the Su-34s were operating from airfields 400 to 600 kilometers inside Russian territory, far beyond the reach of anything Ukraine had used before. Until the targeting model changed. Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, had been running a pattern-of-life analysis on Su-34 squadrons for at least the better part of a year before the strike documented here. The method drew on 3 overlapping data streams. The first was commercial satellite imagery. Platforms like Planet Labs provide daily passes over Russian military airfields, and the open-source intelligence community had been systematically cataloging Su-34 parking aprons, shelter bays, and maintenance activity since 2022. By 2025, analysts had enough historical imagery to know which aircraft shelters at which airfields were active, which bays corresponded to which sortie patterns, and, critically, when aircraft were most likely to be inside those shelters versus on the apron. The second data stream was radar tracking. Ukrainian-operated and NATO-linked radar systems, combined with open-source ADS-B and signals intelligence, allowed analysts to build sortie timelines. When individual Su-34s launched, their approximate heading and altitude when they returned. Over months, this data produced something valuable: a maintenance window map. Aircraft that flew 2 or 3 sorties in a day required ground time. There were predictable cycles of between 6 and 12 hours when a specific airframe would be inside a shelter for servicing, rearming, or fuel system checks. Those windows were the targeting opportunity. The third data stream was signals intelligence, the electronic emissions from the aircraft and the ground support equipment. Maintenance cycles generate specific radar and communication signatures that are detectable at distance. The combination of imagery showing a closed shelter bay, a sortie timeline showing a recently returned aircraft, and signals consistent with active maintenance gave Ukraine's targeting teams a high-confidence picture of where a specific Su-34 was, at what time, and how long it was likely to remain there. What Ukraine was building, in effect, was a schedule. The Hardened Aircraft Shelter, the HAS, had been the standard solution to exactly this kind of threat for decades. NATO airfields were built around them. Soviet airfields were built around them. A standard Soviet-era HAS is a reinforced concrete arch, typically with walls between 1 and 3 meters thick, and an earthen berm built up over the top. They were designed to survive near misses from conventional iron bombs, the kind of weapons an adversary would have used in a conventional air campaign. They were not designed to survive a direct hit from a penetrating munition delivered with precision guidance. The distinction matters enormously. A runway is a soft target in a different sense. It is wide, exposed, and easy to photograph after a strike, but it can be repaired in hours with prefabricated concrete slabs and a work crew. Russia demonstrated this repeatedly through 2022 and 2023 when Ukrainian strikes hit airfield surfaces. The craters were filled, the runways were back, but a shelter housing an aircraft during a maintenance cycle is a different category of target. Destroy the aircraft inside, and you have not disrupted one sortie, you have removed that airframe from the operational inventory entirely. At a replacement cost of approximately 50 to 60 million US dollars per Su-34, and with Russia's defense industrial base unable to produce new Su-34s faster than its Novosibirsk aviation plant's current rate of perhaps 6 to 8 airframes per year, every aircraft destroyed on the ground is an irreplaceable loss on a timeline that matters. Here is the question that the GUR's targeting team had to answer before this strike was authorized. Could Ukraine reach a hardened aircraft shelter at a Russian airfield 400 kilometers from the front, hit the specific bay housing the target aircraft, and do enough structural damage to destroy or mission kill the aircraft inside? The answer came down to the munition. Ukraine's long-range strike arsenal by 2026 included several penetrating and quasi-penetrating warhead options used in combination with various guidance systems. Ukrainian officials have not publicly specified the exact weapon used in the shelter strike discussed here. Operational security reasons are obvious. But satellite imagery analysis published by open-source analysts in the months before this video described post-strike damage at a Russian airfield used by Su-34 units that was consistent with a penetrating munition impact on a hardened shelter roof. The imagery showed a collapsed shelter bay, partial roof failure, and what analysts described as secondary fire damage extending to the adjacent bay. The structural signature, a localized collapse rather than a crater pattern consistent with a near miss, pointed to a direct roof strike with a munition capable of defeating reinforced concrete. The reported weapon type consistent with this damage profile is a modified variant using a hardened penetrating warhead, similar in concept to the Us-Gubu-28 bunker buster category, though considerably smaller, delivered by a long-range strike system. Ukrainian defense industry has been working on exactly this category of munition since at least 2023, and Western-supplied systems adapted for this role have been discussed in defense reporting without specific confirmation. The honest reconstruction framing is this: Ukraine used something that could break through a Soviet-era shelter roof and detonate inside. The imagery confirms the result. The exact system remains officially unconfirmed. What the imagery also showed was that the strike was not alone. The documented strike was one node in a broader campaign of pressure on Russian tactical aviation infrastructure that had been building throughout early 2026. Ukrainian long-range strikes had targeted fuel storage at Russian airfields, maintenance equipment depots, and, in at least 2 reported cases prior to this one, aircraft on open parking aprons. The shelter strike represented an escalation of targeting ambition, going after aircraft inside their hardened protection, during a maintenance cycle when they could not scramble and evade. The Russian air defense picture around the targeted airfield is reconstructed from the reported outcome. The strike apparently succeeded, and from what is known about Russian base air defense layering. Major Russian military airfields hosting tactical aviation are typically protected by a combination of S-300 or S-400 long-range systems covering the outer perimeter, shorter-range Pantsir S-1 gun missile systems covering the immediate airfield area, and electronic warfare assets. The Pantsir S-1 carries 12 57E6 surface-to-air missiles and two 2A-38M 30mm autocannons, with an engagement envelope against aerial targets out to approximately 20 kilometers. Against a small, low-observable strike drone or cruise missile approaching at low altitude, the Pantsir S-1 has a documented mixed record in this war. Its radar struggles with targets that exploit terrain masking, flying low enough to be hidden by tree lines or gentle ridge lines until close range. Multiple confirmed Pantsir losses throughout 2022 to 2026 involved the system being struck before it could engage, either because the incoming weapon approached below its radar horizon or because the operator made engagement decisions too slowly against a fast-closing threat. At a range of under 5 kilometers, against a subsonic but maneuvering target, the engagement window for a Pantsir crew is measured in seconds. The duty officer at the shelter heard nothing unusual until the sound arrived after the impact. That sequence, silence, then the concussion, is consistent with a subsonic approach that reached the target before its acoustic signature did. The shelter bay collapsed inward. Post-strike satellite imagery, analyzed by open-source accounts within 72 hours of the reported strike, showed the roof of one shelter bay had partially failed, with debris visible on the apron outside. A second shelter bay in the same block showed heat signature evidence consistent with fire. The Su-34 that had returned from its morning sortie, or one very like it, in that bay, on that cycle, was assessed with high confidence as destroyed or severely damaged. Russia's defense ministry did not confirm the strike or acknowledge aircraft losses. This is standard procedure. But the silence itself is data. In cases where Russian air defense successfully intercepts an incoming weapon over a military installation, the ministry typically announces the intercept. No such announcement was made for this location on this date. Now the strategic arithmetic. Russia's glide bomb campaign in 2025 and into 2026 averaged, by Ukrainian Air Force estimates, somewhere between 100 and 150 Fab series glide bomb drops per day across the front, concentrated on the Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Donetsk axes. That rate required a sustained sortie tempo from a Su-34 fleet that, as noted, numbered roughly 120 operationally available airframes. Those airframes were not all flying every day. Maintenance cycles, crew availability, weather, and mission planning meant that perhaps 40 to 60 aircraft were generating sorties on a given day, with each aircraft flying 1 to 2 sorties and releasing 2 bombs per sortie. Lose 2 or 3 Su-34s per month, and the math starts to shift. Russia cannot replace Su-34s faster than its production line allows. The Novosibirsk aviation plant has been operating under wartime production pressure since 2022, but Su-34 production involves hundreds of specialized components, and the impact of sanctions on titanium processing, electronic components, and precision machining has been documented in both Western intelligence assessments and Russian industrial reporting. 6 to 8 new airframes per year means the fleet cannot absorb steady attrition of 2 to 3 per month without shrinking. A fleet that shrinks means fewer daily sorties. Fewer daily sorties means fewer glide bombs on target. Fewer glide bombs on target means Ukrainian defensive positions can be held at lower cost. This is the arithmetic Ukraine's targeting planners were running when they approved the shelter strike program. The open question, and the thing that Russian Aviation Command is now grappling with, is what comes next. The shelter strike documented here demonstrated that hardened basing does not equal safe basing. Not when the adversary has developed a targeting methodology precise enough to identify a specific aircraft in a specific bay during a specific maintenance window and deliver a penetrating munition onto it. Russia's immediate response options are limited. Dispersing aircraft to more airfields spreads the maintenance and logistical burden. Increasing the frequency of aircraft movements reduces the predictability that Ukraine's pattern of life model depends on, but also increases wear on airframes and costs sortie capacity. Improving local air defense at every airfield hosting Su-34 units requires hardware and trained crews that are already committed elsewhere. There is no clean countermeasure that costs Russia nothing. Every adjustment Ukraine forces Russia to make, dispersal, increased movement, enhanced local defense, trades against sortie rate, airframe life, or resource allocation. That is the cumulative effect of a targeting campaign that goes after not the bombs, not the launch aircraft in the air, but the aircraft in their shelters during the maintenance cycles that keep them flying at all. What to watch going forward? Whether satellite imagery of major Russian Su-34 operating bases begins to show dispersed parking patterns, aircraft spread across multiple aprons and secondary airfields rather than concentrated in shelter blocks. That behavioral shift would be the visible indicator that Russia's aviation command has concluded the shelter targeting campaign is real, sustained, and accurate enough to force a change in basing doctrine. And a change in basing doctrine, in an air force that has operated from concentrated fixed bases for its entire history, carries its own operational costs. The glide bomb campaign is not over, but the targeting equation has changed. If you want to understand this war as it unfolds, not the noise, the strategy underneath the headlines, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, so you are there the moment the next chapter breaks. Hit the bell. And one final note for the record, this report is news analysis and reconstruction of ongoing, fast-moving events, built on reporting from major outlets, open-source intelligence analysis, and publicly available satellite imagery assessments, grounded in the facts as they are known at the time of writing. As the situation develops, details will change. Stay sharp, stay informed, and we will see you in the next one.